So welcome back, coders. Keep on coding, never give up. Now, here we are going to be talking about arrow functions. Now, what is an arrow function? Initially in JavaScript, the old way of writing functions, let me even write it here. The old way, this is the old way. Now, the old way, you can still use it in normal JavaScript, but the new way of using arrow functions has some benefits, and I'll show you later on the benefits that it has. So this is the old way of writing a function. If I wanted to write a function hello, I would say hello is equal to function, then if this function is returning hello, then I can run my function hello. So to run my function, so I'll say console.log. Then in the console.log, I'll pass in hello. Then inside the parentheses to execute my function. Then when I run here my code, you can see that it has printed out hello world. So this is the old way of running functions in JavaScript. Now, when you're using an arrow function, the new way, arrow function, let's put it new way, arrow function. So the new way to do it, we'll say hello is equal to, then you open your brackets, then is equal to, you say equal sign, then the equal sign you put a forward arrow, then you can open your those other brackets there. So then you can also return now hello world. Maybe I can say hello world. No, let me say hello world 2. No. Let me write that hello world 2, and I can save. So this is the new way of writing functions in JavaScript, the arrow functions. So now let me console.log, and then I execute the hello function. So when I console.log hello function, and then I run the code, you can see that hello world 2 has been printed out. So this is the new way of doing it. Now, what if there's a shorter way of doing it? Arrow functions returning a value by default, meaning that it just returns that value by default. So to do that, let me do that. Then now the other way for an arrow function to return a value by default, you say hello is equal to the brackets equal sign that, then you just put in hello. You just put in hello world, then I'm going to put in 3, hello world 3. So this is how you could return a value by default using the arrow functions. So it means that if I console.log, then I execute my hello function, it should also give me the same result. So you can see hello world 3. Now, the arrow functions with parameters. So let me remove that. Then let me come here. Arrow functions with parameters. Now to work with an arrow function with parameter, I can say hello is equal to the brackets. Now my parameter will go into these brackets, maybe name, right? Then I'll say equal to, then I'll say hello plus name, then I'll terminate, meaning that if I console.log hello and then I execute my hello function, it needs a variable to go inside. So the variable would be the name. So the name I'll pass in will be Henry without vowels. So when I execute my code, you can see it has sent back hello Henry. I could put here a space to make the code much cleaner. And then when I execute, you can see it has sent back hello Henry. So that is arrow functions with parameters. Now let's talk about arrow functions without parentheses, meaning that if you forget the parentheses, these parentheses here. But when you forget the parentheses, it can only work when you forget the parentheses. It means that you're going to put in a what? You're going to put in a variable. That's when you can be able to forget the parentheses. So you can say hello, but this can only work when the variable is 1. So you can say hello name, then arrow function, your arrow function, then you can pass in hello space, then plus name, then you can terminate, meaning that if I run my function and then I put in a name Joseph without the vowels, then I clear here, then I run the code, you can see it has brought back hello Joseph. But in this case, I've missed out the parentheses. Now that is how arrow functions work. But now what is the use of arrow functions? arrow functions, they come in handy when you are dealing with usually classes, which class is bound to which class and which class calls which class. So in regular functions, the this keyword represented the object that called the function. It means that the this keyword would represent the object that called the function, which that object could be maybe the window object, the document object, or a button or whatever. But with the arrow function, this keyword, it always represents the object that defined the arrow function. It means that if the arrow function is defined in a certain, it's defined in a certain object, this keyword would be represented by that particular object. Now this could not be making sense, but we can do an example and see how it works. Now to do the example, I want you to create a new file. Create a new file. Come here, create a new file, and then save it as maybe index.html. So I'm going to do my HTML to make my to put on this code. Now after that, we should go down here at before body here, head, come here, and then we are going to create our script. So the script we shall create, let's create its script, and let's close the script, and then let's create a class inside this script. So the class, we're going to call it header, and then we're going to pass in our constructor in the class. Let me pull this code somewhere up. We're going to pass in our constructor, so I can remove that and then expand that. Our constructor in the class, constructor. And then the constructor is going to have a variable color. So I'll say this dot color will equal to red. Then it's going to have a function called change color. Now this function can be defined two ways. You can define it the old way, or you can define it using an arrow function. And both ways of defining it usually determines how the function is bound. So we can maybe define it as change color will equal to function brackets that. Then what it's going to do is simple. This is what the function is going to do. It's going to call document.getElement by id demo.inner HTML, and then it's going to pass in this. It means that this object will be printed onto our web page. So now we need an element with an ID of demo. So to make an element with an ID of demo, we can come here and maybe put a paragraph. Then we give the ID of the paragraph to be demo, and then we can close the paragraph. So it means that this object will be put into our paragraph. Now we are going to check. We're going to check and see how both ways of defining the function affects which function it is bound to. So now I'm going to put in the logic of how we are going to see this. So after defining your class, come down here, and then down here we are going to say the window object calls the function. So when the window object, so I'm going to say the window object calls the function. So we're going to add an event listener. So let me just copy the code here and then add it here. So window.add event listener load, then my header.change color. So the event listener will wait when the window loads. This window object is the one that is going to call this function. It's going to call this function inside the header object. So now, since this is the original way of defining functions inside objects, this function will be bound to the window function. It will not be bound. It will be bound to the window object or the window class. It will not be bound to the header class. But if you use an arrow function, the arrow function would be bound on the what? Header. Would be bound on the header class, regardless of which object or which class calls it. But in this case, since this is not an arrow function, and since the window object is the one that has called it, it's the one that is going to call it immediately the window loads, then it's going to be bound to the window object. That's why this keyword will be bound to the window object instead of being bound to the class to the class header. So then again, we're going to have a button. So let me just copy the code to save time here. Copy, and let's come down here. No, it's not it. Let me copy it properly. Copy, then let me come and paste it here. So we're going to have a button on our page. Now this button is going to have an event listener. So now in this case, when I click the button is going to have an event listener. Then it's going to call this function myHeader. Now when I click the button, the object that is going to call this function myHeader.changeColor is the document object. It means that this keyword will be bound to the document object, because we are not using the arrow function. But the arrow function will only be bound to the header class, and whatever function, whatever object calls it, it will not be bound to that object, if that makes sense. So now this is going to be a button that calls the change color function, but this is the document object that is going to call it. So now we have to create our button. We have to create our button with the ID btn, and it has, maybe it shows click me. So we can come here and create our button, and then we can save. So then let me go to my desktop. Let me go to, where is that folder, ES6, and then let me open this file with Brave. Open with Brave. So Brave will open it. So we shall have here click me. So then wait, let's have a paragraph ID demo. Copy. Let's first look at this code properly. Paragraph ID demo. Save, and let's go back here. Refresh, click, refresh. So the problem why the code is not running is because I forgot to initialize my class. So I should say const myHeader. Const myHeader will equal to new. Then I'll put new header. Then I can save. So I can go back to my file here, refresh it. Object window. When I refresh it, you can see object window. So immediately the window loads. This window object is the one that calls this function. That's why here we have that it is the object window that called that function. It is bound to this. So now when I come back here and I click here, you can see that it is the object HTML button element that called that function. So that the function is now bound to the object HTML button element. It's bound to it. So every time I click, it's bound to it. Now what if I used the arrow function? So let me use the arrow function here. So I save. Now let's go back to Brave. You can see that initially with the normal function, it is the object window that first called it. So when I refresh here, you can see that it is our object, this new object that I created, header, that actually it's the one that called it. Oh, it's not the one that called it, but this keyword is bound to it. It's not bound to anything else, it's bound to it. So even though I click here, our button object will not be able to, will not be bound to this keyword in the header class. So even though I click, you can see it's always bound to the object. So that is the difference between the arrow function and then the normal function. But that's how both of them work. If you understood, thank you for watching, and continue coding. Never give up. Continue coding.